Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, my name is Vana Bărbulescu and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Linguistics of the University of Bucharest and lecturer in Romanian at the University of Oxford. It is my great honor to participate in this event celebrating the Romanian Language Day. This year marks 500 years since the first non-translated document was written in Romania. The August 31st marks the annual observance of the Romanian Language Day. Why is Romanian Language Day celebrated on the 31st of August? What really happened on the 31st of August? How should we relate to this date? The origins of this can be traced back to the events that took place in Chișinău in August 1989. When the Great National Assembly called for the Romanian language to be declared official language in Moldova and for the transition to the Latin alphabet. The law validating the Romanian language as official language in Moldova was passed on the 31st of August 1989. 20 years later, in 2011, various associations representing the Romanian-speaking communities from Bulgaria, Serbia, Ukraine and Hungary established the 31st of August as the Day of the Romanian Language in these communities. In Bucharest, a legislative proposal was initiated in 2011 and became law in 2013 when it was adopted by Parliament. August 31st is, on the one hand, a recognition of the official status of the Romanian language, but at the same time it is a manifestation of language loyalty in historic communities and in much recent diasporic communities. Romanian is today the official language of the Republic of Romania, the mother tongue of 90% of population, and of the Republic of Moldova, where it is spoken natively by 3/4 of a population of 3 million. But Romanian is also the language spoken in the historic communities. There are Romanian-speaking communities near the borders of Romania in northeastern Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary and in Ukraine. Latest news and headlines from Ukraine show us that it takes more than words for the recognition of the linguistics right. Romanian is also spoken in diasporic community in Western Europe, America, Australia and so on. Therefore, August 31st is about language and identity. Identity is grounded in beliefs about the past, about heritage and ancestry, and about belonging to a people, a community, a place, a set of beliefs and a way of life. Of the many ways in which such belonging is signified, what language a person speaks and how he or she speaks it rank among the most powerful, because it is through language that people and places are named, heritage and ancestry recorded and passed on, and beliefs develop and ritualize. August 31st is also a day of reflection on the relationship between Romania and the dialects spoken south and west of the Danube, and especially on the situation of some of them. Aromanian, also called Macedo-Romanian, Istro-Romanian and Megleno-Romanian, jointly constitute the fourth subdivision of the Daco-Romance branch of the Romance languages. These three dialects spoken south and west of the Danube may be collectively termed South-Danubian. Aromanian speakers are scattered widely over the Balkans, notably southern Albania, central and northern Greece and southwestern Macedonia. Since the first half of the last century, there has also been a substantial Aromanian community in Romania, especially in Dobroja. Megleno-Romanian is spoken principally in villages in the Pella and Kilkis prefectures of northern Greece and over the frontier in the Republic of Macedonia, around Huma or Umma. Istro-Romanian is spoken in some localities in northeastern Istria, Croatia, to the south of Mount Učka and in Jejane to its north. Istro-Romanian is a critically endangered dialect with only 120 active and fluent speakers, most of them members of the oldest generation. The Istro-Romanian Dialect Day, Zia de Vloshka Limba, was celebrated on the 21st of August, but the event had mostly local echoes. The effort to document and preserve this important but critically endangered dialect brought together Romanian and foreign researchers. At the University of Oxford, Professor Martin Maiden and his team completed such a project this year and will continue to work not only on documenting the Istro-Romanian spoken in Istria, but also on recovering the history of Istro-Romanian communities in America, Australia, and so on. August 31st is also a day of thanks and recognition to celebrate the incredible work of foreign researchers from all over the world who have considered and still consider the Romanian language essential for assessing the extent of typological variation in Romance languages, but also for testing recent developments in theories of language structures and linguistic change. Therefore, I would like to add a personal note in my presentation. Since 2012, Professor Martin Maiden has been my mentor. I hold him in the highest regard, both intellectually and personally. So please allow me to express my gratitude to Professor Maiden for all his support, for being a friend, and for all that he has done and continues to do for the Romanian language. I will mention a few recent volumes in which Professor Martin Maiden's involvement and support have been essential. The Grammar of Romanian, The Syntax of Old Romanian, The Oxford History of Romanian Morphology, all published by Oxford University Press. It is a day to say thanks to the Institute of the Romanian Language, Institutul Limbii Române, to the lectors who teach in 55 universities abroad in Europe, the United States, Asia, and Africa, to the Romanian teachers and researchers. At the end of the first part of my presentation, I will quote Professor Maiden, who explaining why he became a linguist, said that Romanian is a Romance language and belongs to this family. In that sense, it is familiar and accessible, and yet it has developed quite special characteristics which can lead us to ask fundamental questions about language theory and language structure. For linguists, the attraction lies precisely in the special juxtaposition of the familiar, known, predictable, and the special, new, and unpredictable. Among Romance languages, Romanian has a well-marked individuality. But how special is this language? Let's consider one simple fact. Between the 16th and the 19th century, the Cyrillic alphabet, borrowed from the Slavs, most probably in the 13th century, prevailed. The first texts in Romanian to have survived date from the 16th century. By Romanian, we refer to the Romance variety spoken north of the Danube, also called Daco-Romanian, so as to differentiate it from Aromanian, Megleno-Romanian, and Istro-Romanian. Romanian is the sole official Romance language spoken in Eastern Europe in the modern age. The first non-translated text available in Romanian dates from the 1521, and it is a letter in which Nacșu, a merchant from Câmpul Lung, Wallachia, informs the mayor of Brașov about the military actions plotted by the Ottoman troops. This letter has long been considered to be the oldest text written in Romanian. However, ongoing efforts made in the past decades to date all Romanian texts by means of watermarks have shown that a manuscript preserved in the Romanian Academy Library, known as the Hurmuzaki Psalter, was copied around the year 1500. The first text in Romanian appeared at such a late date because Slavonic was the official language in use in Moldova and Wallachia, the two Romanian states founded in the 14th century. Slavonic was used by both the church and the chancery. It was used for administrative and cultural purposes. Latin and Hungarian were the official languages in use in Transylvania, in territories inhabited by the Romanian-speaking population living in the western part of the Carpathians. Different terms, common words, anthroponyms, toponyms preserved in Slavonic and Latin documents, as well as a few allusions to the use of writing in Romanian, were attested prior to the 16th century. This data, along with the analysis of the graphemes, have revealed that the writing of Romanian in the Cyrillic alphabet was established in the second half of the 15th century. The emergence of writing in Romanian is one of the most disputed aspects of our culture. Alexandru Rossetti argues that Romanian must have been written before the 16th century, sporadically and in private and intimate setting. If that is true, then we need to postulate the existence of a segregation of religious and secular traditions, both cultural and linguistic. Romanian is a Romance language, but the Romanian writing tradition developed in a predominantly Byzantine and Slavonic environment. This complex historical reality resembles a palimpsest on which its cultural diversity has been constantly written. In this complex historical reality, what was the first alphabet script used for writing text in Romanian? What was the motivation behind this choice? As regards the first alphabet used in Romanian, it is worth mentioning the tantalizing statement of Dimitrie Cantemir in the Scriptio Moldaviae. According to Dimitrie Cantemir, the Moldavians used the Latin alphabet until the Council of Florence in 1439. After the Council of Florence, all the texts written in Latin script were destroyed by Alexandru cel Bun in order to prevent the spread of Catholicism in Moldova. The Cyrillic alphabet was introduced instead, and Slavonic became the official language used both by the Church and Chancery. Cantemir's theory was accepted by the representatives of the Transylvanian school, but it was rejected by Timotei Cipariu, Hajdeu, Onciul, and so on and so forth. Cantemir's theory fails in providing conclusive support and neglects that in Moldova and Wallachia there are documents written in Slavonic before the Council of Florence. Taking into account the particular historical context, social, administrative, political, and religious, in which Romanian culture arose and developed, especially in Moldova and Wallachia, most researchers claim that the Cyrillic alphabet was introduced in Romanian after the 13th century. But when exactly was the Cyrillic script introduced. On the basis of the comparison between the value of Iusul Mare, or the big U's, in the Romanian Cyrillic alphabet and in the Slavonic Cyrillic alphabet, until the mid 13th century, Ion Gheție formulates the hypothesis of the use of those sporadic of the Cyrillic alphabet in Romanian writing after the 13th century. That means before the denazalization of the use in Middle Bulgarian. The Cyrillic script was used in Romanian writing, and that gave rise to a writing tradition after the 13th century. The interval between the mid-13th century and the beginning of the 16th century can be narrowed down according to the evolution of the sound notations for J. In the beginning, scribes used the letter, and I'll use the Romanian names, they are Romanian names, Dobru, Juvete, and Cervo, or some combination of letters, in order to render the voiced postal-velar affricate J. It therefore took a long spelling practice to feel that these notations were not appropriate and to borrow from Serbs or to create a new letter, which is J. The use of the letter J for the voiced postal-velar affricate tends to be constant after the middle of the 15th century. In the 16th century, when the earliest texts in Romanian date back, the Romanian writing tradition was, at least in some parts of the country, about 100 years old. Romanian Cyrillic alphabet is close to the early Cyrillic alphabet of the Old Church Slavonic liturgical language. It has 43 letters, most of which have also numerical values and several diacritical signs. It has an uncial or half-uncial or semi-uncial variant, which is used especially in manuscripts, and a cursive or semi-cursive variant used mainly in the official documents. These two types of half-uncial or semi-cursive lettering were used in parallel in Moldova, Wallachia, and Transylvania until the middle of the 15th century, being successively replaced in the next century by a free cursive lettering close to the Latin cursive lettering, then by the modern cursive lettering. The replacement of Cyrillic script by the Latin script has been a gradual process. Firstly, the Cyrillic numerals were replaced by Arabic numerals, then there has been a tacit substitution of some Cyrillic letters with their Latin counterparts, followed by the removal of most diacritical marks. The last phase of the Romanian writing in Cyrillic, which is characterized by the so-called late transitional cursive lettering, took place between 1830 and 1860. The complete replacement of the Cyrillic alphabet by the Latin alphabet in the United Principalities of Moldova and Wallachia was formalized in 1862 by Alexandru Ioan Cuza. However, there are texts written in Latin alphabet, mostly published in Banat and Transylvania between the 16th and the 18th century, whose existence can be explained on the one hand by the conversion to Catholicism and on the other hand by the influence of the Reform, particularly of the Calvinism. The first Romanian translated text written in the Latin script is a hymn book, Cartea de Cântece, the so-called Fragmentul Todorescu, containing a collection of 10 Calvinist hymns, translated from a much earlier Hungarian original. It was most probably printed in Cluj between 1571 and 1575. The attempt to highlight the Latin character of the Romanian language through spelling is also to be found in a version of the Lord's Prayer written in 1593 in Latin script but following Polish orthography by Lucas Stroic at the request of Stanislav Sarnicki, was a Polish historian and Calvinist. The text was published in 1594. Lucas Stroic is not an ordinary boyar. He is the High Chancellor of Moldova and one of the founders of a small church in the Mitoku Dragomirny village, and his name occurs on the votive inscription, of course in Slavonic. But Lucas Stroic's signature in Latin script appears on several internal documents written in the Cyrillic alphabet, showing Stroic's relative frequent use of the Latin alphabet even before the printing of the Lord's Prayer. In Miron Kostin Chronicle of Moldova and Wallachia, written in Polish in 1677, there are several Romanian words transcribed in Latin. Vito Piluzios, Dottrina Cristiana tradotta in lingua valacca, published in Rome in 1677, is not a text written in Romanian using a Hungarian-Italian-Polish spelling system. In this context, this is worth mentioning the influence of the Polish Catholic school, which directly or through the Italian scholars used the Latin alphabet primarily to facilitate religious propaganda among the Romanians. Between 1640 and 1660, Ilinca Leurdeanu, who is the daughter of Bătrașcu Vodă and the granddaughter of Mihai Viteazul, signed her name in Latin alphabet. We cannot rule out in principle the possibility that the Latin script was used before the introduction of the Cyrillic alphabet and the Slavonic language as the official language of administration, religion, and culture. All the evidence shows that in the all Romanian texts, at least at the official level, the Cyrillic script was predominantly used, but at a private level and less frequently, the Latin alphabet was also used. The Latin alphabet became more common and a cultural alternative from the 16th century onwards, due to the influence of the Reform and especially as the Latinity of the language started to be assumed by Romanian scholars. The promoters and the supporters of the Latin script tried to get closer through writing to the Latin model and implicitly to the phonemic aspects of the Romanian language. Let's go back to Nacșu's letter written in 1521. This is the oldest non-translated surviving document available in Romanian that can be reliably dated, although the date is not explicitly mentioned in the document. The letter was discovered in 1894 by Wilhelm Steiner, an archivist working in Brașov. The document, the oldest non-translated Romanian text, can be dated on the basis of the information it contains. We know that the document refers to actions that took place on the 29th of June or 30th of June 1521. The document is kept at the National Archives in Brașov. Nacșu is the sender of the letter, and the addressee is Hannes Wagner, from Brasov, in fact, the mayor of Brasov. The text contains information about the movement of Turkish ships on the Danube, about Suleiman the Magnificent intention to cross into Transylvania via Wallachia, and about Mohammed Beg's action in Wallachia. Nicolae Iorga, who studied intensively Naxu's letter, dated the document at the beginning of the 20th century. Iorga determined from the data in the letter that the document was written in 1521. A more precise dating was made according to some reliable chronological landmarks, depending on the expedition led by Suleiman the Magnificent for the conquest of Belgrade, and this was done by Matei Kazaku in 1968. In fact, Suleiman the Magnificent prepared the great campaign for the conquest of Hungary. The campaign would last 5 years until 1526, ending with the Battle of Mohacs. Suleiman the Magnificent kept a very accurate campaign diary. Due to this diary, Naxu's letter could be very precisely dated, the 29th or 30th of June 1521, when Suleiman the Magnificent ordered his troop to leave Sofia. However, there are some other 15 letters from the same period, written in Latin, treating the same subject. The preparations made by Suleiman the Magnificent and Mohammed Beg. These letters were addressed to the King of Hungary, the Pope, the Kings of England and Poland. So, the expedition began on the 29th of June or 30th of June, when Suleiman the Magnificent, after a 10-day stopover, left Sofia at the head of an imposing army, an event mentioned in Naxu's letter, and ended on the 28th of August with the conquest of the city of Shabats and Belgrade. The letter gives precise information on the first part of the expedition. It only relates the beginning of the expedition and the locally important information that in order to disperse the military force of the Hungarian kingdom, Suleiman the Magnificent allowed Mohammed Beg, or the Bey of the Sanjak of Nikopol, to undertake an expedition to Wallachia and Transylvania, which was intended to block the troops from Transylvania. But who is the sender? Among the merchants who were involved in trade activities with textile, food and fish was this, I would say, low-ranking boyar from Kumpulung, Naxu. But Naxu was not insignificant in the affairs of the country, since he was mentioned in 2 internal documents of the Wallachian Chancery. A document from 1510 or in 1512, addressed to the officials from Brasov by Vlad the Younger of Leduce, attests the intervention of the ruler in favor of Naxu in a commercial dispute. This dispute apparently had not yet been settled even in 1532, and therefore another ruler, Vlad Necatul, intervenes again in order to solve the problem. The 2 documents prove that Naxu was well integrated in the trade with Brasov, being even associated with Saxon merchants who in their turn supported a prodigious commercial activity in Wallachia. It is significant that these 2 rulers attach importance to the Naxu's economic problems, which proves he had a pass to the court. Naxu is the sender of the letter. Unfortunately, we don't know anything about the scribe. At the same time, several Saxon merchants were trading with him, bringing goods from the southern Carpathians or exporting goods from Brasov, including the future mayor of the city, to whom Naxu will address his letter in 1521, and this is Johannes Beckner. In 1521, Johannes Beckner was the prime magistrate, the Burgermeister of Brasov. His name was Johann, Johannes, or Hans, Hannes, Beckner, according to the different manners of pronunciation in Romanian, German, or Hungarian. The official documents indicate that he was already in this function in 1511. We also know that at the mid-16th century his son was mayor as well. We can only suppose that there were two Burgermeisters of Brasov with identical names, father and son, knowing that in many cases the magistrate position was inherited. In 1559, his son supported the Romanian Dean Coresi in printing Întrebarea creștinească, which is in fact a translation of the Lutheran Catechism. Together with two other outstanding citizens of the Transylvanian Saxons community, Fuchs and Honterus is a celebrated preacher and scholar and active supporter of the Lutheranism, he founded a paper mill in Brasov, the first factory of this kind ever to be made on the Romanian territory. He knew Romanian well and encouraged writing in this language. There is another name mentioned in the letter, and this is Basarab. Basarab refers to Neagoe Basarab, the Romanian prince who came to the Wallachian throne in 1512 and would reign until the 15th of September 1521, when he died only 3 months after the events we referred to. The political stability during the reign of Neagoe had a positive reflection on the demography. The country witnesses a demographic increase which stimulated a growth of the country's income. This fact allowed Neagoe to achieve a work of instruction and foundations without precedent. He also renewed the military force of Wallachia. In 1517, the armies of Wallachia and Moldavia had an important role in what was intended to be a series of crusades against the Ottomans. In 1520, Neagoe informed the inhabitants of the city of Brasov that he would help Hungary, if necessary, with 40,000 mounted and pedestrian soldiers, and that he would use the occasion to sanctify a church. Neagoe considered himself a descendant of the Basarabs and wanted to preserve the legacy and through them to preserve the Byzantine imperial tradition. In his time, Wallachia became an important cultural focus of Byzantine tradition. The Snagov fresco shows Neagoe with a double-headed golden eagle sewn on his red brocade cloth. Following the pattern of the Byzantine emperors, Neagoe wrote in Învățăturile the sermons to his son Theodosie, a name that recalls the Byzantine emperor Theodosie the Great. Învățăturile are a compilation, but the text includes also original parts and represent the first larger written statement of Romanian political thinking. The spelling of the latter, it is, as in most of the chancellery documents of the time, semi-cursive, not semi-uncial, as in Slavonic texts of the time. The orthography is uniform and shows that the scribe had good practice of writing in the Cyrillic alphabet. The same conclusion can be drawn from his knowledge and use of the specific form of letters, including the use of Slavonic, which was the official language of the administration of the time, in the inscription, which comprises the name, title, and address of the addressee of the document, the superscription on or entitling, which comprises the name and address of the physical person issuing the document, the salutation or greeting, and the salutation in the eschaticol. The vocabulary used is almost entirely of Latin origin. The syntactic organization of the sentences follows the pattern of the spoken language. The latter is simple and coherent. Only a few Slavonic words are preserved as such in the passages written in Romanian, ik, pak, I, pak, za, which argues for the existence of an older tradition in the Romanian writing. All the other Slavonic words are fully adapted to the Romanian system. Our identities are indexed in the languages we speak and write, and in how we speak and write them. This indexicality does not need to be intentional. People will interpret our identities based on our language, whether we want them to or not.